If this is your first encounter with this series, and you're wondering what level of understanding is required for following along with everything, I would recommend playing the game's combat tutorial and watching my video called What the Tutorial Doesn't Teach You first, the latter of which is a 5-minute introduction to the concept of initiative. Oh, you already knew everything there is to know about that? That's awesome. Let's go ahead and look at the first fight. All the engagements in this episode are from Despa's skirmish server, and the first clip is a 6v6. I managed to get a good opening on Kodiak with a feint into his feint to parry, and follow up with a stab in his legs. Here I originally thought Kodiak was saved by Aspen's near miss to my right, triggering the miss detector, but upon closer inspection, it seems his parry came out a little too late to qualify for that, and more likely is that he just barely managed to get out of the standard recovery to chamber my follow-up stab. After dissecting it in the editor, it appears to be a spot on 1 second interval between the start of his parry and the subsequent chamber. So, my fault for not hitting him early enough in the release. Here I opt for a chamber myself, and in the event that it is successful, a combo stab onto the bar dish looks like a pretty good follow-up. But since Kodiak parries, that does not end up happening. I do switch targets anyway though. And this stab feint was clearly not necessary. I should just hit him as soon as possible. He wasn't even looking my way. The jump that follows is also very stupid, since it limits my ability to control my movement. And I lose even more stam, which is starting to become a problem. For that reason, I probably should have avoided chambering here, but fortunately he ends up missing, and that opens up for another hit. After which I start running away, because now the halberd is moving up on me and I want to avoid getting hit by him, if I possibly can. Which also allows me to land a free hit on Girth. This would have preferably been a stab, of course, but I did originally think I was going to hit the bar dish again, and going for a stab into stab combo is not usually so effective in duels, so that's where that came from. At this point I really need to fend off the enemies on my left again, that's why I swing back and hit him. Here it would have been a lot better if I turned around fast enough to properly parry their attacks. Instead I went for yet another chamber, which was a little too costly for me at this point. Let's just imagine, for the sake of argument, that instead of chamber feigning, I parried the bar dish, went for a riposte, and then parried Girth as well, mid-riposte. I would have initially lost 6 stam, then I would have lost another 10 on the feint to parry, mid-riposte, but I would have also gained 20 stam parrying Girth, which would have put me at 59 stam, which is a lot better than 35. I also failed to capitalize on the fact that Girth parried in response to my chamber, and if I had hit him there, it would have alleviated some of that stamina loss, but I was too slow to pick up on that. Obviously failing to parry that stab is pretty stupid, but what follows is a little more interesting, because this looks like a continuation of an awful lot of chambering on my part, but it was not intended as such. There is an argument to be had about whether that's down to him playing well or me playing poorly, but what I was thinking at the time was that I was contesting initiative with my initial chamber, and when I saw him feint the slash, I was expecting him to parry in response to mine. So I followed up with a stab, expecting to hit him, but because his initial feint was so short, he regained initiative as soon as I decided to feint my slash, and had no reason whatsoever to read anything I did thereafter. So moving on to what I should have done to counteract this, if I had opted for reading and parrying right from the get-go, a lot of these problems could have been avoided. But if I was so bent on chambering the first attack, I should at least have followed through with it once I saw how short his feint was. And failing to do any of that, the final thing I still could have done was to recognize that initiative was well and truly lost by the time I feinted my slash, and to opt for a parry in response to his stab instead. In summary, there were a lot of things that went wrong in a very short space of time. And here we observe my first and last parry of the match. It goes without saying that my options are pretty limited at this point. I may have lived a bit longer if I had gone for parries instead. I still had 2 parries left in me. I could have also opted for a weapon catch when I lost it. Since I was just 1 hit away from dying, that's like the only way I would have survived losing it. But most of the crucial mistakes were made earlier during the match. Moving on to a 3v3 plus 1. I gotta give myself credit for choosing the right target to engage here at the start. Since I'm the rightmost player in my team, I do have to make sure that the halberd doesn't sneak up on us from behind, so this is definitely the right target to go for. Here then comes the first major thing that I want to criticize about my play. A stab feint into stab follow-up, which in and of itself is completely fine, but as you can see the follow-up attack is very slow, and the reason why I sometimes choose to do this is because I'm anticipating a chamber from my enemy, and in the event that they go for that, it's better for my stamina pool if I don't also have to feint to parry the second attack. The problem with using this method is that it's often very hard to land the second hit if you wait for confirmation of their parry before winding up again. And even in this case, where I did end up hitting him, we can still approximate where his parry recovery ended. So if we assume that this is the first frame of his parry window, we just need to move 1 second ahead to find the end of it, because that's how long that total parry time is. Which would place us at about this frame, and that is nearly 200 milliseconds ahead of where my stab first connects with him. So I have to consider myself lucky that he didn't parry that attack, even taking into account the inaccuracy of these measurements. And so a much better way to counteract this potential chamber would have been to do the same thing that happened to me at the end of the previous engagement. That is to say, an early feint and then a very quick follow-up attack to make sure that I outpace my enemy in the event that he goes for it. I'd say my camera work is good after this axle. I do manage to keep my enemy well within inside my field of view. Helps a lot with reading and avoiding panic parries. And I managed to blow off the bar dish with an accelerated riposte. I think this would have been a good time for a feint, as I was swinging into his feint to parry. This is where I think I make the biggest mistake in the fight, as I attempt to parry the bar dish stab mid-riposte, and I'm sacrificing a potential hit on both of my opponents to maybe parry a very low damage attack that wouldn't even have been close to killing me. And if he decides to feint the stab, I lose all of my momentum as well as a ton of stamina. Ideally, my initial riposte would have also been a stab instead of a slash. That would have given me a lot more damage potential. And since they were both centered around my crosshair at the time of the riposte, I don't think I would have even lost the crowd controlling aspect of the attack, choosing a stab over a slash. I should have turned much more aggressively toward the halberd at this point. Since he was the one who parried my attack, he was going to be the most immediate danger afterwards. And trying to keep them both within my field of view, as I try to do here, just means that I'm not angling my parry correctly when he eventually hits me. This stab riposte attempt is pretty good, timing wise, but missing the attack means I lose even more stam, and then I get forced to do another feint to parry, which doesn't even connect, and that's the end. I think the fight was still very winnable before I feinted my slash riposte, but then things quickly spiraled out of hand. And if we zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture, I did end up fighting a lot on my own this round, despite the S-Talk being a pretty mediocre dual weapon. It could have served me well to find more opportunities to fight alongside my team instead, where the weapon's strengths are of better use. And there is one very obvious missed opportunity for this, quite early in the fight, and that is right after my first parry of the halberd. If I just held my position, and maybe moved a bit to the right, I could have sold them out completely, and eventually looked for a switch behind me. But I messed up that opportunity completely by moving so hard to the left instead. Quite a lot of people in this game, despite the small map. I definitely should have gone in with a stab or stab feint directly after my ally attacked here. Any sort of offensive action would have been better than standing around like this. Forced to parry here, but that turns out pretty well as Schweppes parries in response to my initial windup, and I score a headshot on him as a result. Too late on the parry for the halberd again though, which sucks. I opt for a chamber feint to parry here, which I think is the right call, since there is a lot going on around me and I want to make sure not to get out-dragged by him. The funny thing is I could have avoided having to parry here if I had had a little faith and just kept stabbing until I found Schweppes again. This chamber feels warranted though, just to avoid getting feinted to death, even if it is costly. This parry mid-riposte turned out quite well. Since I managed to hit on Dev as well, I got a total of 40 stand back in the end, something I very much needed at that point. Turns out 30 of those came from the parry alone, which would normally give just 20, but I'm guessing there's some sort of boost to it when you're sufficiently low on stam. Could just be a Despa server thing, I don't know. We'll have to look into that. Now comes the time of my worst target choice this whole match. Femma with the Evening Star is looking like a perfect target to go on while he's engaging my teammates, but I decide to try for Schweppes again by running up into Neat's back, which is a huge waste of time on my part. This second attack is also attempted from way too far away. Clearly I was afraid of getting hit by his slash, but to protect from that I could have simply done a slash chamber into stab morph and potentially feinted if I wanted to. I would have been able to get a lot closer this way and been far more intimidating. This stab feint is at least performed quite well, but it is ultimately not necessary thanks to Neat's amazing drag. So I would never accuse Femma of gambling. Let's just say that if I hadn't feinted there, he would eventually have had to. Maybe he sensed I was attempting a lean back feint since I was staying so far out of reach, and therefore felt confident attacking. You could definitely argue I should have moved closer during the wind-up to make my feint more convincing. That is on me. Anyway, I do get hit there and get freakishly close to dying. But thankfully Neats hits him in the back afterwards, and that timely flinch forces him to hard read my subsequent stab feint. And so he goes down. Now that it's just a 2v1, I basically just gotta do two things, and that is to make sure I don't die, and that I don't feed ripostes excessively. So I play it really safe here and chamber feint to parry again. And we managed to take our first W of this match. So in summary, there were a number of times where I didn't move close enough to my targets while attacking. My decision not to gang up on Femma and Dev in the corner after the intermission was also one of the bigger mistakes this fight. Otherwise I think I did an unusually good job of alternating between chambering or even chamber feint to parrying and parrying, depending on the circumstances. Thank you for watching this episode of Combat Analysis. If you liked it and want to see more of these, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, I'll see you all on the battlefield instead. Alright, Burkus out.